This week on The Aviators, it can be lonely up in the air, but as we find out, there's always a veritable guardian angel watching over you.
Juliet Whiskey Yankee, Roger, climb 8,000.
We show you what it's like to be a U.S. Air Force Thunderbird for a day. And the men and women of the Commemorative Air Force take us back in time with the last flying B-29 bomber in the world, Fifi.
A lot of people thought that this airplane would never fly again.
If you ask any pilot what their favorite thing about flying is, many will tell you it's the freedom. For most private pilots, there's no speed limits, you can come and go as you please, and depending on the airspace, you don't even have to talk to anybody on the radio. Now, nobody's going to argue that that kind of freedom can be enjoyable, but being a lone airplane thousands of feet above the ground can quickly become very scary when something goes wrong. Luckily, in North America, there's almost always going to be an air traffic controller that you can radio for help, almost like a guardian angel watching over thousands of pilots. In Canada, NAV Canada's team of more than 2,000 air traffic controllers are looking out for the safety of pilots everywhere. Tim Wisniewski is an air traffic controller at Toronto Centre.
Well, when something non-routine happens, you'll either notice it in the pilot's voice, he'll make a strange request, he'll do something odd, or he'll actually tell you that there's something wrong. And we react to that.
As a controller with many years' experience, Tim has had several instances where he's helped private pilots in potentially dangerous situations.
So I had one incident where an aircraft was flying from Ottawa to North Bay, and he ended up in bad weather. It was unexpected, and he wasn't qualified to fly in bad weather. And then he lost all his electrical. It was nighttime. And at one point, he thought he only had 10 minutes of fuel. And we ended up doing what's called the surveillance approach. But we knew what altitude he could fly at, where he could be, and we talked him to the ground. He ended up breaking out of cloud at about 50 feet, which is 150 feet lower than most normal airplanes do a missed approach. And he landed, and he called us later saying that if we hadn't been there, he thought he would have crashed.
I myself have experienced a situation where if ATC hadn't have helped, things could have ended up very, very badly. With the help of Curtis, who's a controller with NAV Canada, and Sarah, an experienced multi-engine pilot, we'll now show you this recreation of an Aviators flight that almost went horribly wrong. We're on an IFR flight plan from Baie-Comeau to Ottawa. This isn't a flight myself or Sarah have done before, so the terrain is unfamiliar. We're filed at 6,000 feet, and the outside air temperature is 12 below, so icing is a possibility in clouds.
We're starting to clip the clouds here a little bit at 6.
We've got those mountains below us.
Yeah, so down's not going to work.
No. Let's try to go up. Let's see if we can get up.
Let's okay. Let's see if we can get 8. Montreal Center, Golf Juliet Whiskey Yankee.
Golf Juliet Whiskey Yankee, go ahead.
Montreal Golf Juliet Whiskey Yankee. We're clipping the clouds a little bit here at 6,000, requesting 8,000.
Golf Juliet Whiskey Yankee, Roger, climb 8,000.
Roger, up to 8,000, Golf Juliet Whiskey Yankee.
But as we climb up to 8,000, the clouds are thicker than expected, and we're starting to pick up some ice on the wings. If we continue to climb, we may poke through the clouds on top, but if we don't, we could continue to pick up ice very quickly.
Well, we're almost at 8, but I don't see the sun poking through.
No.
No, let's take it back down to 6. Montreal Golf Juliet Whiskey Yankee.
Juliet Whiskey Yankee, go ahead.
Montreal Golf Juliet Whiskey Yankee. We're picking up ice here, requesting original altitude back down to 6,000.
Golf Juliet Whiskey Yankee, Roger, check you're picking up some ice there. Descend 6,000. I can also do, if you're GPS equipped, I can approve 5,100 feet for you.
Okay, down to 5,100, Golf Juliet Whiskey Yankee.
And 5,100.
Hopefully, by descending to 5,100 feet, we'll stop building up ice.
We're still picking up ice, Anthony. It's building pretty fast on my wing.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah?
I don't like it.
I think we need to land.
I don't like it. And we're below freezing. We're not going to shake it off.
Yeah, let's land.
Yeah, let's get out of here.
Okay.
Montreal Center, Golf Juliet Whiskey Yankee.
Juliet Whiskey Yankee, go ahead.
Montreal Golf Juliet Whiskey Yankee. We're picking up ice, requesting vectors to the nearest airport with an approach.
Okay, Golf Juliet Whiskey Yankee, check a change of destination. The nearest thing I've got for you, I guess, is 11 o'clock and 15 miles. Charlie Yankee, Quebec Bravos, Quebec City International. They have an ILS runway 06, if that'll work for you.
With ice building rapidly, we now have a change in destination. Luckily, ATC is able to point us to where we can land quicker than we're able to figure it out. Also, while we're not declaring an emergency, ATC appreciates the seriousness of the situation and makes sure that we're number one for landing at Quebec City.
Quebec Tower, approach. We've got a rider for you, Golf Juliet Whiskey Yankee. He's currently 25 miles to the northeast. He was planning to go to Ottawa. He's picking up some ice there and needs to get down on the ground quick, so he'll be number one for the ILS 06.
As we're coming down, ice is still building up, so we're accelerating our descent, and thankfully ATC is doing everything they can to help.
And as I turn your base, I can get you down to 3. At 3,000, you should be out of the cloud bases, but the temperature on the ground is still below freezing.
Finally, as we line up for the ILS, it appears that we've stopped picking up ice, and we'll be on the ground soon. While some of the details in this flight were different, this was all based on a very real situation I encountered.
Juliet Whiskey Yankee, thanks very, very much for your help.
No problem, I'll talk to you soon.
One good piece of advice I could give you if you find yourself in a similar situation is not to be afraid to ask for help from your friends on the other end of the radio.
I've had pilots mention it to me that they're scared to talk to ATC, and they should never be afraid, because we're there to help. We're there to provide a service, and anything we can do to keep that flight safe and arrive safely at its destination, I think the onus is on us to do it.
Last week, we took you behind the scenes with the U.S. Air Force Air Demonstration Squadron, the Thunderbirds. This week, one of the Aviators' own, executive producer Lisa Charney, is getting the experience of a lifetime as she gets to fly with Thunderbird 8, Captain Michael Fisher, in his F-16 Fighting Falcon. In the past, fans of the Aviators have seen our hosts jump into the back of vintage warbirds with little more than a parachute briefing. This time will be a little different. The F-16 is a much more powerful and complex aircraft than a Yak-52 or a T-6. And with this being an Air Force flight, Lisa will be receiving top-notch training before she jumps into the F-16. First up is getting outfitted for the day's flight.
Lisa, nice to meet you.
So good to meet you.
I'm Sergeant Sang Lee. My job on the team is aircrew flight equipment.
Okay.
And today you're going to go through a lot of training.
The first layer is a standard Nomex military flight suit designed to provide flame resistance in an emergency. This, of course, has to have a Thunderbird patch.
Lisa, congratulations again. All right.
Wow, this is something.
All right.
Thank you.
So, here's a G suit.
All right.
Next up comes a G suit. This snug-fitting suit connects to the aircraft and as they pull Gs, automatically inflates with air. The suit helps prevent blood from pooling in the lower half of the body. The F-16 can easily pull 9 Gs, so the G-suit and medical training she'll receive later are crucial. Add a harness, the Thunderbird helmet, and oxygen mask, and Lisa's all set for the next stage of training. Captain Michael Carletti is Thunderbird 9, the flight surgeon for the team.
Fantastic. Really exciting.
Great job.
As the team's doctor, Captain Carletti briefs Lisa on how to prevent G-induced loss of consciousness, or G-lock.
The G suit. So you want to squeeze your thighs and your hamstrings, okay, and squeeze, and your calves. It's super hard to squeeze your calves. So what do? I curl my toes. Your butt's your biggest muscle in the body, holds the most blood, okay?
Oh.
So when in doubt, what do you do? Squeeze your butt.
Squeeze your butt.
So
This is accomplished through a series of both muscle contractions and breathing exercises.
you cannot expand your lungs on 9 Gs. So what are you going to do? You're going to take a breath. When you say, are you ready for Gs? You're going to say, yep. And you're going to take a breath in. 75% breath in. I want you to keep your mouth open and close your mouth at your back of your throat at your epiglottis. Okay. It's a... yeah, exactly.
And after G training, it's finally time to meet the pilot, Captain Michael Fisher.
Hi. Wonderful.
Mike Fisher.
Very nice to meet you.
This ride is not for me. I've done pretty much everything that you can do in this airplane. So this ride is all about you. What we're gonna do today is we're gonna go full afterburner takeoff. So I'll go to mil power. You're gonna feel The thrust kind of kicking a little bit. All right, I'm checking the engine out, make sure everything's good, and I'm gonna go to afterburner. I'll say, here comes the afterburner. I'll throw the afterburner in. You're gonna feel that kick. All right, when I hit 400 knots, I'm gonna take this aircraft, I'm gonna pull about 5 to 6 Gs, and I'm gonna point straight up in the air. And we're gonna climb from 0 to about 13,500 feet in about 10 to 12 seconds.
After being fully briefed, it's time to head out and strap into the F-16. With the help of Captain Fisher and the Thunderbird's ground crew, Lisa gets settled in the jet. After a few checks, they're off and taxiing toward the runway.
Thunderbird 8, winds at 160 at 9. When you're ready, you are cleared for takeoff. Have fun. Here we are, airborne. Gears coming up. It's clear at the end of the runway. There's one cloud right at show center. Here's up, lights out. 250, 280, 300, 350. Here we go. Ready? 400. Nose coming up. Go right past this cloud here.
After takeoff, they move to a military operations area and conduct a series of maneuvers for the next 40 minutes. Then, as quickly as it began, it's time to return to the airfield where Captain Fisher conducts a textbook F-16 landing, keeping the nose high as he bleeds off speed before finally putting the nose wheel down.
So Lisa, on behalf of Thunderbirds, again, thank you for coming out and letting us fly for you today. We have a certificate for you here. For a VIP flight. Let it be known that Lisa Charney, on the 30th day of March 2012, flew with the United States Air Force Thunderbirds in the Lockheed Martin F-16, signed by me, with 6.2 Gs documented right there for you.
Wow. Just being able to say I flew with the Thunderbirds means so much to me, and I'll carry that with me forever. So thank you so much, everyone.
Nobody's perfect. And if you try to complete your checklist by memory, then an important step could be missed or forgotten. Remember, if you want to complete your checks the way the manufacturer intended, always use a checklist.
Without question, some of the greatest developments in aviation technology came about as a result of World War II. Prior to the mid-1930s, the idea of a multi-engine heavy bomber was unheard of. By the end of the war, the range, altitude, and payload of these bombers all increased exponentially. Today, heavy bombers still form the backbone of the U.S. strategic bombing doctrine. Although it never served in the European theater, the pinnacle of heavy bombers in World War II was the B-29 Superfortress. Almost 4,000 of these aircraft were built, but today only one remains flying. The queen of the commemorative Air Force fleet, Fifi.
The B-29 was first introduced in about 1942, 1943. It was used all the way up through the Korean conflict and into the later 1950s.
David Oliver is one of Fifi's current commemorative Air Force pilots.
About that time, they were all mothballed. This particular model was put into storage. For many years in the 60s, a few of them flew, but not until the 1970s did the commemorative Air Force find this aircraft in the desert in China Lake. When they found the aircraft, they said, we'd love to have a flying representation of the B-29 in our fleet. That launched into a campaign in order to get the right permissions and find the right people in order to fly the aircraft out of China Lake to Harlingen, Texas. And literally in 8 weeks, volunteers came in, put the aircraft together, and flew it out. Now, the idea of flying it out was one that the FAA was a little bit hesitant about. They really didn't think that we would continue to operate the aircraft. So they gave us a one-time permission to fly the airplane out of China Lake to Harlingen, Texas, where they thought, or so they thought, the aircraft would remain static. Unfortunately for the commemorative Air Force, that's not good enough for us, and that's not necessarily our mission. Static aircraft are great, but what we really love to see is airplanes that you can touch, smell, feel, you can get in them and you can go for a ride. That's what we're about, and that's what we feel commemorates the service of our veterans the best.
During the war, it took an air crew of 10 to take a B-29 into combat. On the flight deck, there were 6 crew, with the other 4 spread between 2 rear compartments.
Yeah, this is the rear pressure vessel of the aircraft, and it was pressurized and it shared air with the forward pressurized compartment. Now what we had a couple gunners in these different positions. This was the central fire control chair that you see behind me. They also call it the barber chair. And then each of these side blisters are gunners that would control the different turrets. The airplane's almost, you could say, divided up into 5 different sections, with the forward section being pressurized, the bomb bays being unpressurized, obviously, for the fact that they could open the doors, the rear section being pressurized with the gunner compartment, an APU compartment, again, unpressurized, and then a tail gunner compartment, which was pressurized again. Now, all those compartments shared air through a common access, a tube or whatnot, so everything was pressurized together, but through different sections where there were bulkheads that were able to contain that pressure.
The B-29 was designed to fly at a high altitude, upwards of 30,000 feet, to evade not only enemy fighters, but also ground anti-air batteries. The only effective way to have the crew operate at that altitude was to pressurize the aircraft. At this point in history, pressurizing an aircraft was a very new thing, and pressurizing a bomber provided unique challenges.
The idea of holding on to a 50 caliber machine gun and hanging out the window, the amount of cold air that's coming in, the amount of recoil, all of those things conspired against the person operating the weapon. With the B-29, the idea is that if we could remotely mount the turrets and put them on the outside of the pressure vessel, then we need a way to control it from the inside. So the way they do that is through the sighting devices. Now the sighting device is a very complex piece of equipment that uses sync motors and gyros and all types of equipment of the day that was really very revolutionary for 1940s technology. And with that technology, they were able to have the gunners inside the aircraft in the pressurized compartment in the comfort where it was a heated space, and yet have complete and total control over the 4 different turrets on the aircraft.
There are 10 50 caliber machine guns mounted on Fifi. 6 spread between the forward turrets, 2 in the rear turrets, and 2 in the tail. The tail gunner on Fifi found themselves in a lone position at the back of the aircraft.
We're in the back aft portion of the airplane behind the rear pressurized compartment, where the tail gunner would actually have to wind his way through the systems to get back into his small pressurized area. And I think that's one of the tougher positions in this particular airplane, just because of the solidarity of being in the back of the airplane by yourself in your own pressurized area. So what would happen if he got hurt was, unfortunately, they have to depressurize the airplane and crawl back with portable oxygen bottles to get to him.
Since it was built and designed by Boeing, a lot of the knowledge gained from the B-29 was later applied to commercial airliners. Many of the things that were new or unusual on the B-29 are now commonplace on commercial aircraft, such as an APU.
Yeah, the engine sitting next to me here is an auxiliary power unit, also called an APU. Now, it was actually just a small 2-stroke engine, almost like what you'd see in a lawnmower, and it actually had an engine generator connected to it where it would provide electrical power for the aircraft. These particular engines have such high loads, electrical loads for cranking and starting, that they knew that there wasn't a battery bank really large enough to support that. So what they did with the aircraft was they built an APU here in the aft compartment, which would be used for starting.
As David mentioned earlier, the B-29 has 3 separate pressure compartments. To get from the rear pressurized gunner compartment to the cockpit during flight, crew would have to crawl through a 40-foot tunnel above the bomb bay.
In this particular compartment that I'm sitting in, the front pressurized compartment, there were 6 crew members during a World War II operation. We had the bombardier, who sat in between the pilots up here in the nose. We also had the pilot, or aircraft commander as it was called, and the co-pilot, who was referred to as the pilot. The flight engineer was actually sitting backwards, facing the rear of the aircraft, right behind the co-pilot side. And then the radio operator and the navigator were also in the forward compartment pressurized area.
Compared to most large modern aircraft, the position of a flight engineer is a unique one.
Right now I'm sitting in the flight engineer's position, and what's interesting about this position is that this is probably really the guy that has a lot of impact on how the airplane operates. He's the hardest working crew member by far, and during the flight portion of the phase basically maintains all the systems. Right in front of me here you've got the mixture controls. The pilot does not have any control over the mixture knobs. They're all back here at the flight engineer. He has his own set of throttles that correspond to the throttles that both the pilot and the co-pilot have, and has all the different other engine instrumentation in terms of electricity, pressures, temperatures, engine starting procedures all happen at this panel.
Having the flight engineer does take a certain amount of workload off the person sitting in the left seat. However, as the aircraft commander, this person was also responsible for the crew and the aircraft. On top of this, actually flying the B-29 is not an easy task.
I think that the key to flying this airplane is energy management. Maintaining the energy and controlling that energy is the key to making the airplane do what you want it to do. So the idea of being 4 or 5 seconds ahead of the airplane, anticipating its moves, is absolutely essential. It's not a fighter, it's not a small airplane, it doesn't maneuver on a dime. This airplane is a lumbering beast that takes a little time to make a turn, to make a correction, and you've always constantly got to be a couple steps ahead of it.
At 29 years of age, David is the youngest of the current B-29 pilots. But compared to the men who actually flew the aircraft into battle over Japan, he's actually quite old.
I think one of the amazing things that sometimes I kind of step back and realize with our American history is just how young the men were that flew this particular aircraft. A lot of the non-commissioned positions or the enlisted men were all about the age of probably between 18 and 20 years old. A lot of the officers, the pilot and the co-pilot, were more probably along the lines of 21 to 25 years old. But it's incredibly difficult to imagine such a young crew flying such a big airplane in such an important time in our history.
The B-29 has been said by many to be the aircraft that ended the war with Japan. Its whole purpose was to drop bombs, and this is a job it did very well. Sitting in front of the pilot and co-pilot would be the bombardier, who actually sighted and released ordnance. On August 6, 1945, the B-29 Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another was dropped on Nagasaki. Within less than a week, Japan surrendered. With Fifi, people are able to see and ride in a working representation of what is clearly one of the most important aircraft of the war. But in 2005, Fifi was almost grounded for good. During the war, the B-29 engines were notoriously unreliable, many of them serving for less than 200 hours.
For many years, we operated the aircraft with really a surplus of engines. So we would have issues with one, we had another one in surplus, we would just throw it on the airplane and go right on down the road. About 2004, we had about 6 hours on an engine and it started spitting part numbers out the tailpipe. At that point, we said, we can't keep doing this, we're out of engines. So at that point, the airplane was brought down and was made static. A lot of people thought that this airplane would never fly again. I'm very proud of the fact that the Commemorative Air Force did not accept that fact that the airplane would remain static. We put a crew together, took a Skyraider, and we took a C-119 Packet, and we said, these are both great engines. We mated the two together, and we came up with a hybrid Curtiss-Wright 3350s that you see in the B-29 today. There are no other engines that you'll ever see in the world like the engines we have on Fifi today. They are one of a kind. We even call them R3350s-B29.
Thanks to this dedication, people all across the country are able to see the aircraft fly, to hear the roar of the engines, and to experience Fifi for themselves. For more information on today's segments, visit www.theaviators.tv. From our official home at the Whitman Regional Airport in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, we'll see you next time on The Aviators.